Okay, can I bid everyone welcome this evening on behalf of the Coleraine Historical Society. Welcome you all on Zoom and Facebook. Special welcome to members of the Portrush Heritage Group who've been asked along to join us this evening. In particular, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker this evening, Neal Anderson, to deliver our annual Robert Anderson Memorial Talk. First of all, I'd like to pass on apologies for our chairman, Jeff Wark. Jeff cannot chair the meeting this evening, so that's why you've got me, due to family circumstances. And I know the thoughts of everyone are with Jeff and his family at this difficult time for him. Before I introduce our speaker, I would just like to say a few words about Robert Anderson, Neal's father. I didn't have the privilege of knowing Robert, who passed away over 3 years ago, before I joined the Society. But he was our chairman at the time of his sudden death, and indeed editor of the band disc, I understand. Robert took a great deal of interest in many aspects of life in the local community, not least as regards local history. He was a founder member not only of the Coleraine Historical Society, but also he was a founder member of the Portrush Heritage Group and the Bann and Foyle Shipping Association. His books and many articles stand as testament to his ability as a writer and researcher. He was appointed Portrush Harbour Master in later years, I believe, a post he was well qualified for, as his knowledge of our sea, coastline, ships, trade, marine life, and particularly the River Bann was unparalleled. How appropriate is then that tonight's talk is about shipping on the River Bann. I would now like to say a few words about our guest speaker, and I make no apologies for reading out an article about Neal. With a father and grandfather who were experienced seafarers, it's perhaps no surprise that Neal too took a keen interest in ships, boats, and nautical matters from an early age. Neal grew up in and around Coleraine Harbour from the mid-1970s to the early 1990s, enjoying the hustle and bustle of the place and meeting many of the characters that once worked there. As a toddler, apparently, he'd pester his granny at Drumsleigh to take him down to the Bann to see the ships and wave at the then pilot Tommy Lagan, who would sound the ship's horn in reply. How nice. Neal often joined boatman Ernie Yemen on the pilot boat S.G. Martin from Port Stewart, later going on board ships with his father Robert as he piloted them to Coleraine. He also spent many a summer on board the dredger Barmaid, all things that today's health and safety rules and risk assessment, of course, would not allow. Neal himself obtained a boatmaster's license in his teens when he skippered the River Bann passenger vessel Signet. He took part in the 1991 tall ships race in Belfast before going on to university in Plymouth in 1992 to take a maritime studies degree. After that, he moved to Portsmouth, serving as editor of the magazine Maritime Journal until 2001, when he went to London to embark on a career in business journalism, later taking on roles in content marketing, digital communications, and PR. Neal now lives near Bromley in Kent with his wife and 2 young children, yet he still retains a genuine passion for maritime matters and the local history of Coleraine and the Causeway Coast. As such, he is extremely proud to be able to give the memorial talk in honour of his late father, Robert, this year. So, I think I should now ask Neal to deliver this year's Robert Anderson Memorial Talk entitled A Thorny Subject. And if we could have questions at the end, and if you would mute yourselves on Zoom during the talk. Over to you, Neal.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and appreciate the very warm welcome and you allowing me to do the talk. Everybody in the Historical Society allowing me to do the talk this year. It is indeed an honour, and the only thing I think, because of the subject, I think I'm going to have a little Robert on my shoulder in my ear going, oh no, that date's wrong, or something like that. So hopefully he would have enjoyed this just as much as I have had putting it together. So bear with me, I will share my screen. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Good stuff. Always helps. So, a thorny subject. If the machine works, there we go. So this is predominantly about ships of SW Coal and Company Limited, who traded to and from Coleraine for almost 80 years. So the company itself, Samuel William Coe and his partner, William James Ireland, they together set up a ship brokerage business and insurance brokerage business in Liverpool back in 1914, so just at the start of the First World War. Now, the surprising thing, which I didn't know, is that partnership really only lasted a year. So it was William James Ireland actually took over the business in 1915. And then he carried that on and he became a ship owner in 1923. And the first ship was actually the Hawthorne. And several other ships then came with Thorn names. And it wasn't until 1935 that they established the S. William Coe and Company Limited organization. And I struggle to work out why that might be, but it's possibly because, you know, in those days, businesses came and went, and within the shipping industry, it was quite cutthroat. So maybe using your former partner's name as the business would enable you, should anything go wrong, enable you to take over the business under your own name. So that's one of the only reasons I can think of, that perhaps why the Samuel William Coe wasn't actually Samuel William Coe and Company Limited. So it's an odd one, but I wasn't able to get to the bottom of that one. They had a number of subsidiary companies, Coes, and soon after the main company was established, they set up the Thorn line, mostly connected with the ships. And then in the 1940s, they set up the Ban Steamship Company Limited. It wasn't until the 1955 that Mr. Ireland, he actually sold the company to another Liverpool shipping company called Booker's, the Booker Group. And they actually had lots of interests, particularly in South America, to do with sugar. So a lot of their trade was the sugar plantations and bringing sugar back to the UK, and they had the Booker line to do that. So that's when Coes changed their that's the house flag and the funnel. So the previous one was the original Coes one, and then they changed basically the Booker colours. They changed the B to a C, so that's why it's kind of the perhaps later years, that's the colours you would have remembered seeing at the quayside. And the Booker Group itself, they're actually connected with the Booker Literary Prize. So that there's a connection there, and they're currently part of, they went through many changes, and they're actually the people that supply Tesco's now. The logistics company, they don't own ships anymore, haven't done for a long time. And the Booker Group actually supply Tesco's these days. So Coes traded on under that name for quite a while, and then in the 70s they merged with Metcalfe Motor Coasters and became Coe Metcalfe. And then in 1980 is when the original S. William Coe and Company, that was dissolved. And then in the 1980s, Coe Metcalfe became part of the James Fisher group. They're very well known in maritime circles and very well respected. But gradually the Thorn names and the Thorn ships, as they were sold out of the business, the company kind of dissolved and just merged into Fisher's. So it was 1995 that after 80 years that Coes themselves ceased to exist, sadly. Now we're getting into maybe some pictures you might have seen before. The top left there, we have the Hawthorne, their first ship. The dates against these ships, that's when they were actually built. The Hawthorne, that photo at Coleraine is from around 1925. That ship actually went ashore at Cushendun when she was en route to Coleraine back in 1940. declared a total loss, but was sold, repaired, reboilered, and had other owners right up until 1951 when it was scrapped. At the bottom there, we have the Red Thorn, and she served for a little while and ended up in November 1938. She hit the bar mouth while trying to come into Coleraine, quickly turned around, made for Portrush, and just about made it to Portrush and sank. She was emptied of her cargo of coal, patched up, and then taken to Londonderry, where she was scrapped. So that was her final voyage. The Quick Thorn, top right there, she actually capsized and sank in 1942 off the Welsh coast. So shipping was quite a dangerous activity. It still is, but very much so in those days, with no GPS, no electronic navigation aids, etc. So it was much more dangerous, and things would likely to happen to these smaller ships in rough weather. There's some more ships. The Firethorn, the first Firethorn, she ended up broken up at Hull in 1950. The first Silverthorn, pictured there, she served until 1936, and then sold on, and she ended up being broken up in Holland in 1952. The Overton, she was a familiar sight in Coleraine for many years. It's not hard to work out what happened to her. With that photo, that's actually the Maidens off Larne, and she ran aground there and was declared a loss in 1955. This is a great picture of the Briarthorn alongside at Coleraine, and there's still a bit of her around the local area, because she ended up wrecked at the Barmouth in 1939. So there's still probably some of her hull plating on the Castle Rock side. Because as that pier was being built, there was another dredger wrecked there at the very same time, but the Briarthorn came a cropper there too. Now, this is interesting. This is the Banthorn. She was built in 1917, but she was the first ship to have the Ban prefix, and also led to the creation of the Ban Steamship Company. She served Cowes from 1939. Before being broken up in 1954. And the unique thing about her is that she changed owners and changed managers a couple of times, which actually meant that she had the Banthorn name no less than 3 times in her career, which is quite unusual to get the same name 3 times. This is the next one is the Banquest. She was built in 1937, so one of the later steamers. She served the Cowes until 1955, and before she was broken up in 1958. Here's a gaggle of Ban ships, some familiar ones, I'm sure, to a few of those watching this evening. There's the Ban Trader, the Ban Pride, the Ban Rose, the Ban Queen, the Ban Maid, and the Ban Spur. And it kind of highlights, I've seen other photographs of many ships tied up alongside the quay, but it highlights that, these were the HGVs of their day. They brought things into Coleraine, and they took things away from Coleraine. So they carried everything and anything from general cargo to and from Glasgow and Liverpool. They exported potatoes, pit props, and they imported things like coal and timber. And the Ban Maid, she served from 1949 and was broken up in 1952. The Ban Queen was another victim of the breaker's yard, and she was broken up in Troon in 1957. The Ban Spur served from 1955 to 1960. She ended up being scrapped in Dublin. And the Ban Rose was broken up in 1961, so one of the later ones. The Ban Trader, I believe she was the last Ban steamship to call at Coleraine in 1962, and she was broken up that year in Preston. The Ban Pride, actually, she's a slightly longer life. She soldiered on for quite a while in Spain until 1970, which I hadn't realized until doing some research for this. She was then known as the Kuma, and she ran aground before being broken up that year. This is a rarely seen photo. This is at the Ban Bridge from when she was built in 1919. So she only served for a couple of years. Coes seemed to, from 1949 to 1951. Coes were very adept, obviously from a shipbroker background. They would probably pick up these more elderly steamers at the end of their lives and trade them, get the maximum value out of them for a few years before selling them on for scrap. So that was it seems to be the way they did things in the early years. And this is another unusual shot. This is what became the Ban Prince. She was launched in 1933, had as the D mount. She had a very interesting career during World War II. Actually, she had a volunteer crew during the war, and she actually helped to evacuate troops from Dunkirk. And then in 1940, and then after that, she was taken over for the records say unspecified special government services. So don't know what that is. I'm sure there was a lot of trade for her to do in the Second World War. But it also meant she was one of the first ships to land at Sword Beach during D-Day. She had a lot of medical supplies, which clearly were badly needed on that day and the immediate days afterwards. And it wasn't until 1955 that she was acquired by Coes and renamed Ban Prince. However, she was acquired in April, but on the 12th of November 1955, there was heavy fog in the River Mersey, and she actually collided with a tanker called the Juno and sank. The crew got off, but unfortunately one of the crew of 9 lost their life, and that was actually a gentleman, the second engineer was James Ferris of Limavady. So a sad end for her. The ship itself was a navigation hazard and was raised, was actually taken to Holland, where she had her engine removed and then was used as a hulk. So a short career for Coes, but a very long and interesting career as a ship. This shot shows the Ban Pride in the foreground and the Silverthorn, and this shot's from 1960. The Silverthorn was actually the first new build ship for Coes, which is a highly significant, I guess, part of the history of the company. And she was also the first motor coaster. She was specially built to trade to Coleraine and other Northern Ireland ports. But the Coleraine significance was that she had a left-handed propeller, and that really enabled her to help her turn in the river, because that's in the days before you had novelties as bow thrusters and things like that there. So they only turned using the ship's engine and ropes and the flow of the river. So that was one of the things that she was actually deliberately specified with that to trade to Coleraine. And this is another shot of her from fresh from the builder's yard. She's still got her builder's pennant flying on the foremast. And this is actually the Silverthorn on her maiden voyage to Coleraine back in 1958. This shot here, this shows the Ban Spur, the Silverthorn in the middle, and then there's another ship called the Heathergate, which you can't really see behind the cranes and the steam. The shot was believed to have been taken from the Ban Pride in around about 1960. And this was one of my dad's favorite photographs of Coleraine Harbour, because it really captures a moment and an era when the port was at its busiest, and you can see pit props lined up against the quay. There's steam coming. There's the cranes unloading the coal. There's a couple of characters in the front. It's a wet, typical Coleraine dump day. So it really captures the essence and spirit of the place, Coleraine Harbour at its height. And during the research for this presentation, I actually stumbled across this photo. This is from a coastal shipping magazine on their Facebook group, and it's the same collection of ships. So it's very unlikely, particularly as the ship against on the right there, she wasn't a regular. So it was probably taken on the same day by the same photographer. Unfortunately, apologies to the original photographer. I don't know who they were, but I certainly thank them for taking such a great picture. And this is the Silverthorn again. She's coming into the port. You can notice the Inst playing fields just about in the background there, and the ship's hull itself is hiding. You can just about make it out if your screen's big enough. You can see the jetty for Chemstrand, the chemical jetty. Chemstrand later became Monsanto and Monty Fiber, so it was a new addition to the port. And this is Silverthorn again alongside the quay at Coleraine, again around 1960, 1961. Obviously that's part of, you can make out the church, but the sheds are long gone, so that's part of Dunn's car park now, where she's sitting. And the Silverthorn herself, I mentioned the Booker group and the Booker connection. When in 1968, she was renamed Booker Trident, and the Booker group, so she'd come out of Coes and went back into kind of the main Booker group, and she set sail for Guyana. And there she stayed for many a year in the sugar trade and helping move things around the coast there. And in 1977, she was sold actually to the Guyana National Shipping Corporation. And then in 1979, she was renamed Guy Trident, and she served right up until 2010. So not that long ago, really. But sadly, she had a fire, and the wheelhouse suffered a major fire, so it was uneconomical for them to repair her. So sadly, she was kind of abandoned and just moored up, and she sank in Georgetown in Guyana in South America in, I think, 2010, 2011. So a sad end for a once proud ship, but she did have quite a career and certainly well traveled. The Blackthorn, she was also built new, especially for Coes. She served from 1959 when she was built right up to 1976. She was obviously a very familiar sight, the quay at that time. So I'd like to just thank, this is actually a photograph by Mr. Morris Bradley, and it's courtesy of the Old Cologne Facebook group. So thanks to Ronnie Gamble for allowing me to use some of the photos from there. Much appreciated. There's another one of the Blackthorn from the same day, again, one of Morris's. And that's me, age 2, at the wheel of the Blackthorn, and holding me is my grandfather, Thomas, or Tommy Anderson. He had served in the Second World War. He was on the destroyer HMS Zulu, and then thankfully survived the war. But after the war, he went into merchant ships, initially deep sea, before towards the end of his career, he worked on a lot of the coastal ships, including Coes. He was on the Blackthorn and also the A&M. So that's I have a personal connection with the Blackthorn, literally, as you can see. That photo was from around about 1975, I think. So, in 1976, she was sold out of Coes and she was renamed the Rudyard, and in 1980 was further renamed the J&C. So she was she moved over to the Caribbean at this stage to serve all the little ports and harbours there. And it was in 1984 that she'd suffered engine trouble in a port in Aruba Island, and so from the Caribbean Sea, it's kind of north of Venezuela. And because there was engine trouble, the owners, they didn't want to fix it, and they basically abandoned her. So she sat there before being disposed of by the port authorities. I'll show you that in a wee second. But here This is a courtesy of Robin Cardwell, and this is via the Old Coleraine Facebook group that this photograph appeared. But I just draw it's a great shot, a nice close-up, unusual shot, but I'll draw your attention to the bit above the thorn name, so where the mast comes down, and you see the supports there. So I'm hoping I have now a video of the how the blackthorn looks today, because hopefully this will work. She was sunk after being disposed. They tried to sell her, and nobody wanted to pay for her. So she ended up being a reef for diving just outside of Aruba. So hopefully. That's those bits I was talking about in the earlier photograph. So as you can see, she's changed a wee bit since then, but that video was from 2015. So if you're in the Caribbean Sea and like a bit of diving and want to see the blackthorn, that's the place to go. The next new build ship for Coes was the Maythorn. She was built in 1962 and served until 1981. She was actually the first photo there of her. That's her as she was originally built. She was then lengthened in 1976 to take more cargo, basically. So she was a regular with coal. She too had a mishap with the bar mouth, hitting one of the piers on her way in, and again just about managed to make it to the quayside where she was unloaded, and she was patched up. That was in June 1967. So she'd got a good long career after that. So that wasn't her end, thankfully. But it was lucky that that didn't happen to her in the river or block the channel or in the railway bridge. She did manage to make it to the quay. After she was sold in 1981, she was renamed the Brindle. She held that name for just a short period of time. Before in 1982, she was called the Wilgo. I guess Will Go Anywhere for cargo. And then in 1985, she was renamed the Monarch Pride. And then in 1988, she was scrapped in northern Spain. I've got another short video now. This is actually, I don't know how the sound will come across, but this was an extract of a film that my dad made in the early 70s. And then it was used, as some of you may remember, it was used for the BBC Northern Ireland Travelling Picture Show back in 2013. So it's only a minute or so long, but I'll play this. If you hear the sound great. If you don't, well, the images speak for themselves anyway. So.
The film was taken in 1974, at a time when I decided that we should have this on record because it hadn't been recorded before. I had access to a movie camera, and I decided to make a film of the voyage of a ship from Port Stewart Bay here into Coleraine. The film was done over a period of time because I couldn't do everything in one day, obviously, and it worked out well. The film shows John Linton, the boatman. Shows Tommy Lagan, the previous pilot. Shows some of the people working on the ship. Shows some of the people working at the docks at Coleraine.
I'm pleased to say I actually still have a bit of the Maythorn. The red ensign came off the Maythorn, and it was given to my dad by the skipper because he was the pilot that day. The toggle had broken off the top of it, so they couldn't really use it on the ship anymore. And he said, the skipper at the time said to my dad, "Do you want this?" And he went, "Oh, okay." So that sat in a drawer for many years before. In the early 90s, I commandeered it to be a Coleraine football flag. So hand sewed, cut out and hand sewed all those letters on myself, although I think my mum probably helped me, to be honest. So yes, there's still a bit of the Maythorn in the family, so to speak, which is nice to see that something that on the band is a bit of a bandsider as well. One of the next new build ships, we're starting to get into more modern times now, is the Firethorn. She was built in 1967 and served right up until 1989. She only made a few trips when she was new because she was considered a bit too deep drafted for Coleraine. So we didn't see much of her when she was a new ship. But later in the 80s and right up until the kind of early 80s up to the late 80s, she was a very regular and familiar sight along the quay, both bringing in coal, but it was also the time whenever Maxwell's were exporting a lot of stone for the Channel Tunnel project. So she would bring in coal, she would come in loaded and go out loaded with stone. This picture here was actually taken by Captain Ian Ives, who was the skipper, and it comes courtesy of his son, Cameron Callum Ives, who recently restored an old lifeboat in Coleraine, so he'd still a connection with the town. He's since sailed that from Coleraine to Falmouth, where it's going to stay. So it's a nice little local connection. And here's another little video of the Firethorn turning. This is courtesy of John Boyd, and again, this is via the old Coleraine Facebook group that it appeared. They're just using the flow of the river and just extending the turn. That's her leaving. I took that whilst I was at the Inst. Had my camera with me, and she was sailing out. So never want to miss an opportunity. She was actually sold and renamed the Firestorm in 1989, and then the Angelus in 1991, before becoming the Limerick in 1994. That's when she moved over to the Caribbean to trade around there. And on quite an interesting story, in October 1996, she was actually intercepted by authorities with over 6 tons of cocaine on passage from a place called Barranquilla. She's on the way to the Bahamas. I think the US Coast Guard and also the Cuban Coast Guard were involved. She actually ended up getting abandoned by the crew in bad weather and later sank. So she's sitting on the bottom somewhere, not sure where. This is another blackthorn. So she took the name over after the first one you saw and served between 1979 and 1985. And she had quite a varied career. She ended up in the Mediterranean and Greece. And in 1985, she was renamed Tresco, before in 1990 getting named Poseidon, ending up as the Georgia M in 2004. She had a crane fitted to serve some of the smaller harbours. She was broken up in Greece in 2012, so not that long ago. This is the Anne M, a very striking looking ship and one of the biggest kind of traditional ships to visit Coleraine. She actually holds the record draft ever to enter the port. I think it's 15 foot 3 inches. And she was so deep drafted. I, as a child, remember her fishing at the Ban side with my granny. And as the ship went past, because of the displacement, the water, it's like the Red Sea parting. There would be, a lot of the water would move away from the shore as the ship passed, and certainly with the Anne M, you really noticed that because she was so deep, and she got stuck for several hours one time trying to enter the port at the railway bridge. Took her many hours to get her free. I think with a little help from the barmaid to nudge her a bit. So they actually, because of that, the harbour commissioners implemented a maximum draft restriction for the port. And my grandfather, Tommy Anderson, he actually served on the Anne M right in the early 80s. She had quite a long career, but she was broken up. This is her at the Breakers Yard at Garston in 1994. So that's what happened to her. One of her sisters was the Eileen M. So she served from 1968 to 94. And again, that's her coming alongside the key at Coleraine. She went to slightly warmer climes too. So ended up in South America, and she last worked out of Honduras. And she too, like the Blackthorn, was sunk as an artificial reef off the Dominican Republic in the early 2000s. It was one of the slightly more famous or infamous visitors Coleraine had, the Nellie M from 1972 to 1982. The bottom picture is 1982, and that's when the IRA hijacked the foil pilot vessel, the foil leader, and they went out to her while she was waiting at anchor in the foil because the weather was too bad to enter Coleraine. So she was sheltering in the foil. And because she was a British ship, the IRA placed a bomb in the engine room, and thankfully they put the crew into the lifeboat. One of the skipper was actually Ian Ives, who I mentioned earlier, and the crew was pushed away from the ship before the bomb went off, and she settled on the bottom. She was raised and carried on with a number of owners. She was patched up and repaired. And believe it or not, she is still going. This is her pictured in Colón in Panama. She is currently called the Carmen II. I don't know if she moves around a lot. I think she's maybe just used as a kind of floating store or something there, but that's her today. So interesting to note that a ship that was bombed and sunk in 1982, is still going to this very day. This is another Silverthorne. She had a relatively short career with Coles between 1974 and 1978. She ended up in Paraguay during the 90s, and she was believed scrapped. She was deleted from the shipping registers in 2010. Coming towards the end of the kind of the more modern coast ships now. There's the Hawthorne, which some of you may remember. She's had a few color schemes, as you can see. She was built in 1967. Very good looking and very good sea ship, apparently, from people I've spoken to. And she was acquired from the German owners in 1977. The picture, the bottom left picture there, where she's painted all red. She was commandeered along with one of her sister ships, a larger, it's a Gorsethorn, I think. She was too large to ever come into Coleraine, but those two ships acted as guard ships whenever they were doing drilling investigations for the Channel Tunnel. So that's why they were painted red. You can just about see the 21 below the Hawthorne's name on the bow. So Gorsethorn was guard 20 and the Hawthorne was guard 21. So they would circle, because they obviously the English Channel's the busiest, and the Dover Straits are the busiest shipping lane in the world. Those ships acted as guards and to protect the drilling ship while it was fixed and not able to move. So they'd keep other ships out of the way for safety. And she was later renamed Blackbird and visited Coleraine a couple of times under that name. In 2009, when she was known as the Gulf Trader, this is her pictured in Miami as the Gulf Trader. But the captain, it's ironic that the company that was owned it at that time was called Shady Traders, because the captain, he was actually arrested for drug smuggling in Miami. So maybe choose a different company name for your business if you're into that sort of activity, perhaps. She's actually still going. She's in the Caribbean. I think couldn't trace her until maybe a year ago, but her last known name was Zaka Express, and she was last seen going between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. A lot of ships these days carry AIS, which is Automatic Identification System transponders, so you can track them and know where they are. But obviously, if you're engaged in not quite legal activity, you might want to switch that off. And Dominican Republic and Haiti aren't known for their bends of the rules, shall we say. So she's possibly still going. And here's another Silverthorne. So she was the Silverthorne from 1990 until 2002. She was actually built as the Shamrock for Shamrock Shipping of Belfast as the Shamrock Enterprise. And then she served for a number of years before being sold and renamed the Temptation. Again, ended up in the Caribbean. And during one voyage, she sunk. So she's now sitting on the bottom of the Caribbean Sea somewhere between Panama, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. Her twin sister ship, the Shamrock Endeavour, who's later renamed the Rosethorn, she ran aground in the Ban in thick fog, but thankfully no damage, and was refloated on the next tide, and then was renamed Rosethorn a little bit later. So that was 1988 that she ran aground. She had a bit of an interesting history too, because when she was sold in 2001, she was renamed the Rosebank. In October that year, the fridge in the accommodation caught fire. As you can see, the crew had to end up abandoning the ship, but there was a naval ship close by, so they were able to put out, or do a good job of putting out, the fire. And she had her accommodation completely rebuilt. So they basically cut a lot of it off and put a new section on, and she was renamed Rosebank, but then she reverted actually back to the Rosethorn name in 2005. Unfortunately, she suffered another fire, but this time it was an engine fire. in 2008, and then she ended up laid up for a number of years, but was actually scrapped in Denmark in 2012. They were kind of the last of the coal ships that visited Coleraine. But certainly, they delivered employment and prosperity for generations of locals, not only along the quay, on board, as I've already alluded to, but farther beyond as well. And they still have a legacy in the town, as some of you may know, because in Harper's Hill we have Maythorne Avenue, Hawthorne Avenue, and Silverthorne Avenue, and that's all named after those ships. So there's still a little connection with the town there. You couldn't not mention or show some of the characters that worked along the quay and served these ships. So here's a lot of the dockers. Many of the names would be familiar local names at the time, and all these gents are standing with big shovels. So they're not out doing a spot of gardening. They'd be in the holds of the steamers, shoveling coal into large buckets like that. So that bucket was lowered down by the small cranes in those days. The men would all fill the bucket with their shovels. The crane would lift the bucket up, and it tipped over into the coal lorries or onto the quay, and then take it to the coal stockyards or whatever, where it would either be tipped out or shoveled again. So lots of people required to do that. So lots of employment. And this photo here is thanks to Kieran Crawford, courtesy of the Old Cologne Facebook group. Is another, maybe this has been used in some of my dad's books as well. So it shows the ship itself, the Ban Rose, but there's a local gentleman on the left who's Harry Murphy. He's the local news agent. There's Jock Adams, Willie John Fleming, Bobby Wark, Charlie Booth, Joe Fleming, most of the Flemings from Cologne. And many other names have listed there. There's a few of them again, hard at work. Some more general cargo, possibly from one of the band boats from Liverpool. More local characters. As you can see, they moved on a wee bit from the shovels to it's more mechanized now. So you have the larger hoppers where the cranes would lower their own grabbing buckets, would lower the coal into the grabbing buckets, and the lorries would take it away. And you didn't just have the dockers and the crane drivers as well. You had the pilots and the harbour commissioners and the harbour master as well. So this is February 1967. So this is when the SG Martin first arrived in Port Stewart, fresh from Tyrrells of Arklow, where she was built. She's still in the river and still looked after very well, which is great to see. And this shows a couple of the pilots. So on the left there, you've got Clarence Doherty, a well-known family connected with the pilotage in Port Stewart. Charlie Hamill, who was one of the harbour commissioners at the time. There's the boatman, William Smurl, another pilot, James Doherty, and at the back, you see the late harbour master, Will Dalzell. He just recently taken over as harbour master at that stage. There's Tommy Lagan, who you saw earlier perhaps on the video. Tommy actually served on the coal ships before retiring home to Coleraine and becoming pilot in 1968. And I remember being in the car with my dad when I was a young child, giving Tommy a lift home to his house or his flat in Cologne. So it's a fond memory of Tommy. There's somebody a bit more familiar walking along the side of the SG Martin. That's my dad on the right there, and I think that's the late Colin Davison, bottom left, and possibly Story Pollock. I'm not sure who the chap in the middle is, but the boatman at the time, that would have been Ernie Yemen or Robert Garvin, driving the pilot boat at that stage. There's some more dockers. Sammy and Jimmy, or Johnny, rather, sorry. And just it's not always coal. There was a lot of timber brought into Coleraine. and it's not always neatly stacked in the ships. As you can see, that's how it was loaded. You just lower it down and fit it in as best you can and secure it as best you can. That's why you often used to see footage of timber ships that either capsized or you were listing at an angle because the cargo had shifted. And you possibly see a slight example of that at the top there. But that just gives you an indication of the different cargoes carried and how they were actually loaded in the ships. And there's another one from, so this is from the Normal Maxwell collection, care of On the Ban Facebook group. So just before the harbour office was demolished. There was a little video here, so I'll just play this one again from the Normal Maxwell collection. It shows the blackthorn, the Eileen M, and the bough of the maythorn. So it gives you a little flavour of the busyness of the harbour in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. This presentation has been called a thorny subject for a couple of reasons. Another one of those, as well as being about the thorn line, is that that once bustling waterfront, which has huge historic significance, is important thing to look at. So it dates right back to when the town was founded and before, arguably, as to the plantation times and the 1600s, then moving into the 1800s, starting to actually properly develop as a commercial harbour and landing place then. And then I'm sure you've all seen this photo. It's a cracker, right, and it's 1898. Then moving into the 50s, as we've already seen, when it's kind of the port was at its peak in terms of the numbers of ships and the cargoes being carried at that stage. I love this photo. It's obviously just taken from the old bridge, looking along the old quay there. But what I really like about it is just the number of people and what they're doing. But if you look closely, there's a guy up the funnel giving it a paint. So it's nice when you see little details of that. And that's actually something I remember when the ships were in port for a while, the crews would maintain them. They would do some painting, particularly if they were stuck there because of the bad weather or while they were unloading. And you used to, I don't know if you still can, but along where the scrap quay is now, you used to actually see where some of the crews had either sort of graffiti their names, either their own names, their initials, or perhaps sometimes the names of the ships. So I don't know if any of that's still visible, but something I remember seeing certainly when I was serving on the Signet. And moving into the later 50s, you're starting to get the steamships being replaced by the motor coasters. That's unloading timber, obviously. In the 70s, that's the Maythorn again, and the Blackthorn behind. And moving up into the 80s, that's where the older part of the quay is where the barmaid used to tie up. So you'd seldom see larger ships along that side, that part of the quay. In the 80s, sometimes you'd see one, which is a very impressive sight when you come over the bridge. But of course, nowadays, it's a bit of a car park, literally. And it just sits quiet, unrecognised, empty, unused, and covered in moss and weeds, which is a bit sad. And there it is, doing nothing. But to me, that's a wasted opportunity. I thank Kenny Stewart, who's a drone for this photo. So just looking at that area, there's very little to suggest that what once went on there. If you look closely, you'll see a couple of the original bollards. They're still there. That's all that kind of alludes to its past. So this is the other thorny subject. it is as I'm sure we all agree, and anybody in Korean Historic Society would agree, it's a bit of an acute embarrassment that the oldest known settlement of man in Ireland and a plantation town doesn't have a museum. But that could change potentially, because a unique opportunity has arisen. We could embrace that unused key to really celebrate our history and heritage. You're probably wondering, what's he on about? Well, there's this ship called the Noordborg, and she's sitting in Holland, and she's almost identical to the Silverthorn, because they would have been built. There was the Dutch shipyards were churning these little coastal vessels out, and they were all of a kind of a similar format and design, based on their heritage of building smaller vessels at that stage. And as you can see, the Noordborg and the Silverthorn, they're almost cut from the same cloth, very visually identical. Even the stern area is similar, and the wheelhouse, or the traditional coaster, would have that kind of the wooden wheelhouse. So they were kind of a bridge between the steamships and the sailing ships to what you would get nowadays. So nowadays, modern ships don't even have ships' wheels these days. They've just a little lever. So these were kind of the last proper traditional ships. So you're probably wondering what I'm going on about here. Well, during my research for this, and also during lockdown, when you spend time looking at the internet, I discovered that the Noordborg is for sale. She was purchased by after service. She changed hands a couple of times, but she ended up in the ownership of a Dutch ship broker called Dick van der Kamp, and he saved her from the breakers yard because he recognized the historic significance of the ship. And there's that's the thing that struck me, is the ship itself is for sale at just 90,000. Well, it's 90,000 euros, to be honest. So that made me think, when I saw that, the Noordborg, she's the last of her kind, and she's a unique survivor, and she's in excellent condition, because when the Dick van der Kamp bought her, he treated her to a full bare metal restoration. So that's her in 2009. As you can see, she had a lot of work done, patched up, any rot taken out and fully repainted. But she's not moved much since. But this year, she was actually subjected to a dry docking again. So as you can see, still in very good condition, nice and shiny. That was her in August. That was her back in the water in September. But imagine the Noordborg renamed Silverthorn and turned into our museum right in the heart of Coleraine. So taking this space, having a ship there. So that empty quay, with a little bit of imagination, could look like that. And I'd actually like to thank John Baird, who's I believe joined us this evening. This picture is by the marine artist John Baird. He's from Letterkenny, and for many years he was a good friend of my dad's. And for many years he's turned out some excellent maritime paintings and other paintings. But he loves painting old traditional coasters like this. And he did the painting of the Blackthorn that was used in one of my dad's books, The Century of Ships. But the funny thing is, John went to sea as a cook, and so John joined a ship in Coleraine to be the cook, and that ship was the Silverthorn. So John actually has a personal connection with Coleraine, but also the Silverthorn, and particularly Dutch coasters as well. So imagine that, and here's the plans of the Noordborg. So my idea was perhaps that you could do something like this. So you take the hold of the ship, you convert that into your meeting or exhibition space, but you also create a kind of a false deck cargo above. So that could be clad in wood, so it looks like the ship's carrying wood, but actually that's additional office space and somewhere to have further exhibitions or whatever, have it as a multi-service, multi-use part of the ship. And that's Nordborg's hold. So you can see there's a fair bit of room to play around with in there. And that's what it potentially could look like to fit it out. There's some other artist impressions of what it might look like. Obviously that's a real museum, but it's kind of those are kind of the dimensions, and that's the sort of thing that you could potentially turn it into. And you could also use it as a venue. But it wouldn't just bring one benefit. I think there's lots of benefits that this project could potentially bring to Coleraine. I guess the primary one and the main driver is giving that dedicated museum space right in the heart of the town. And yes, unlocking, I know it's frustrating that the collections that the museum services had, that they unfortunately don't have somewhere to really display those permanently in the heart of Coleraine, and this would unlock those collections to do that. And I think it would really revitalise and regenerate that kind of unused area relatively quickly as well. And that in itself would then be a real catalyst to drive growth, footfall into the town, and help drive social and economic growth, which, as we know, the town kind of would need something like that. And we're doing it, with that real historic connection with the river and the collections of the museum services, as well as celebrating the kind of the maritime and industrial heritage of the port as well. And the other advantage of it, the ship exists. You're not having to knock something down, build something up from scratch. The ship's there, and it could be relatively easy, and it's a low carbon, low risk investment to turn something into a museum. But there'll be more, there are other benefits as well. You could use it as a skills and development resource for the local community. It'd be great for schools and both primary schools and secondary school pupils to visit and learn about the history of their town, but also perhaps involve local college students who are looking at apprenticeships or learning and traineeships and things like that there, that they could actually hone their skills, metalwork, woodwork, electrical engineering, plumbing, etc. They could do that for real on the ship. And it could even be a training resource for a sort of full-scale training resource for the local emergency services as well. And you could use it to offer volunteering opportunities as well for the local community. There's economic opportunities as well. So as a venue, you could partner with other local businesses to offer that. And the fit out work could perhaps be undertaken by local contractors. And the ship's accommodation, you'd be ashamed to rip all that out, but you could use it as small office space. So you could hire it and use it for like startups and entrepreneurs, or for small private meetings. That's another use for it. And to me, it would be a real sort of visible landmark right in the center of the town. It would be very impressive when you're driving over or walking over the old bridge there to see the ship tied alongside, and it gives you that real sense of pride back into the town rather than an empty space. And it would unlock positive PR opportunities for the local area, both in local and perhaps national media. So to me, that's why the Silverthorn, that it could literally be the key to celebrate Colerane's past while also promoting its future. And I think this person would support the idea. And that's that's my thorny subject, or rather several thorny subjects rolled into one. So.
Okay, Neal. Thank you very much for sharing a record of the past, the shipping in Coleraine, and indeed your vision perhaps of the future. I hadn't thought that, I'd never thought of a floating museum for the town, I have to say, so certainly that's food for thought. I think at this stage, I would like to invite any questions. If you just maybe want to raise your hand, and if I can see you, you can pop your question to Neal. Anybody?
Barbara's got her hand up there.
Barbara, yes, Barbara, go ahead. Barbara first.
It's not really a question, just a comment. I grew up on Milburn Road, opposite the Bascule Bridge, and that brings back so many memories for me of standing in the upstairs bedroom, watching that lifting and the ships coming through. It was lovely to see those photographs. I remember the names and I remember seeing them. And you've a great collection of photographs there. Wonderful to see the videos too. And very interesting, your ideas for what could happen at the quay. That's nice to have those insights as well and hear that. I think your dad would be very proud of what you've done today.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd have something to say about
it. Thank you for that, Barbara. Trevor, I see you have a hand there. Trevor Adams. Trevor, go ahead.
I'm on the other. Thanks very much, Neal. Now, like yourself, I spent my school days not doing my homework, but most of the time down at the harbour. And it was lovely at night to see all those boats that I remember. Made me feel young again now, I must admit. Now.
Oh, good stuff.
So, very, very enjoyable now.
Oh, thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, Trevor. Gordon from Canada, you wanted to ask a question? Go ahead, Gordon. Can you maybe unmute yourself, Gordon? We're not hearing you, Gordon. If you could unmute yourself. Hello.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah, that's you're going now.
Okay. I'm just interested. I'm really interested in this because I pass the bridge, went over that bridge every day, dozens of times, I'm sure, in my bike and walking. But anyway, is there a book at all about all that history that was given today? Written, is there a book about it? All the stuff that was delivered today? Because I'm really interested in that, in the history of each ship.
There's a couple. Wouldn't be a surprise to say that they were written by my father. So he wrote back in the 70s. He wrote the Port of Coleraine, which is long out of print. And there's a couple of others. There's A Century of Shipping, a history of the River Bann, and there's another one, Maritime Memories, which is more recent. So
yeah, I had that one. But do they go into the history of each ship?
No, it's no. The Port of Coleraine does a little bit, but each ship that was a few hours spent researching.
There's a job for you. You have all the information, man. Thanks a lot.
I'm glad they didn't have a bigger fleet.
No.
We'd still be going on about an hour later, probably.
Thank you for that, Gordon. I thought for a moment there you're going to offer us the 90,000 euros to buy that ship. But so yes, could I, Ken Ward, you'd like to speak?
That was a tremendous talk. Thanks very much, Neal. It's very, very informative. We arrived just as things were beginning to go down in the 60s. So it was very evocative of all kinds of things. The amount of work you've done on it is superb. There was one question, you nearly answered it at the end, which is who built these ships? You talked about them being built at various times, but with that design, but right back in the turn of the century or just after that, what was the main source of shipbuilding for these coastal ships at that time?
Most of the steamers would all have been built by little small British yards, most of which are long since gone. They were sort of just churning these out with the basic steam engines. But it was the Dutch that took the lead on the motor coasters. So when they started to be powered by diesel engines, certainly the Dutch were the world leaders at that stage in that. But prior to that, well, most of the little steamships that you saw, like the van boats, etc., they were all small British yards that built those.
Thanks very much.
Say hello to Fran for me as well, by the way.
I will, yes. Thanks very
We
much.
were at school together. So.
Splendid.
Okay, Anne-Marie, you want to ask a question? Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, that was excellent, Neil. Thank you. Really enjoyed it from start to finish. But a message here, maybe from Loretto, saying, and it actually echoes very much something I want to say about the wonderful vision for a floating museum and regeneration for the future of Coleraine. And maybe you should put your vision forward to council, so which obviously was something I was thinking about as well. But I was wondering if is this a vision that you've shared elsewhere? Or are we the first tonight to see it?
You're the first people to see it publicly.
Okay.
Privilege.
By that I mean I've been speaking behind the scenes to relevant stakeholders just to see if it might be a goer, because I didn't want to go too far down the line or spend too much time on it if people think it's not a good idea, etc. But I'll not name people, but so far it's been overwhelmingly positive, and people see the benefits from many different stakeholder levels. So that's encouraging, but
Well,
it would need further conversations and
Neal,
support from people. So.
And would that be, would you, obviously, you'd keep us sort of informed in all of that? And
oh, very much so. So
I think it would be something that would all be very keen, certainly to know about and maybe get involved in. And I had another question for you about the ships themselves. Just as you were going through it there seems to be a lot that either sank or went on fire or had various unfortunate incidents happening to them. Is this, would that have been the same for other other fleets of ships, or was this one just particularly unlucky?
no, I would say that these ships were worked hard, long hours, in all weathers, literally. So some of them, coals were generally well maintained ships. But the older ships, obviously the older they are, the more problems they have. But shipping accidents still happen today, even with modern fleets. Sinkings, groundings, collisions, fires, etc., etc. So it's not unique to coals. In fact, they were fairly lucky, but they also had the disadvantage of coming into a dangerous place like the Barmouth before there was the dredger there. So that's why a couple of them ended up getting wrecked or damaged at the Barmouth. So.
Great, thank you. I'll pass you over to see if Billy wants to have
Okay,
a word.
thanks, Anne-Marie. Billy, you wanted to?
Yeah, if it's possible.
Go ahead, Billy.
Where has Neil got to?
I'm still here.
All right.
Well, congratulations on all the talk, Neil. Very, very interesting. And can just say the good fortune to know not only your father, your grandfather, but all the Martin family before that. And the one thing you mentioned, the number of ships come into Coleraine Harbour, I thought maybe, or do you have among your pictures, would you ever have any, because I remember on a number of occasions, a lot of double docking going on down there. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yeah, they ran out of key space, so they tie up alongside each other.
And sometimes triple. But you were discussing the Barmouth, but before that, I should add, by the way, when I worked in the I think I worked in the railway, so I went there anyhow, but I was very much involved in the lifting, the bascule span. We had the electrical work to do in that. But if I remember right, at low water, there was only a fathom. Wasn't there a fathom of water at the Barmouth? The rest of it was.
Yes, it was fairly shallow.
So what did those? That's a big question. What did those boats draw? You say the majority?
The little steamers would have been. I think they'd have been about 12 feet. But the Anne M, she was one of the biggest. She'd 15 foot when she was fully loaded.
Because that was a very temperamental place. And I mean, I knew Tommy Lagan actually. And Tommy did say at times coming in, if there's a wee bit of a rustle on, they actually bumped the bottom.
Well, they would, because obviously if you hit the trough of the wave, the depth gets a lot less. So that's whenever they hit the bottom. I think the last one to be wrecked was the Burgundia in the 80s, when she was leaving with a cargo of potatoes. She bumped the bottom, but when she bumped the bottom, she bent her rudder, and that means she lost steerage. So she drifted out into the just beyond the Barmouth, and then ended up on Castle Rock Beach.
And that was one thing we all used to love going fishing down the Ban. You know, whenever the boats come in or out, her sucking the water out and pushing it back in. It was a great occasion. Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk, Neal. Thanks very much.
Thank you. The modern ships nowadays, they're different designs, so they're obviously not as nice looking, but they're not as traditional hulls.
No,
so, but they're much more functional, and therefore they carry more. But
they're
squarer. Yeah, they're much squarer bottoms, but they draw less water.
Yeah.
Okay, Billy. Thanks.
Thank
you
very
much. Neal, I just wanted to ask you sort of a couple of questions. I mean, we've talked there about a possible vision for the future using the floating museum idea, which I'm sure the society would be very supportive of. But I wondered, is there any future for Coleraine as a port? I mean, it's a subject quite of interest to me recently. I've been doing a bit of research on the construction of the moles at the Barmouth, you know, and the history of Coleraine as a port. Is there any future as Coleraine as a port?
That's a very tough question. I think as ships get bigger, it's harder for Coleraine to compete as a commercial port, particularly one that has challenges. I personally would be very saddened the day that commercial ships no longer come into Coleraine, because of the centuries of heritage that represents. But I think that will be determined by modern economics and trade, rather than necessarily a desire to keep the port open. But I'd be very sorry to see that go.
I mean, I suppose there's a risk factor there for shipping companies and using the, Coleraine. Obviously, it's quite shallow. I suppose that's something they have to factor in.
Yes, the ships nowadays are shallower, so they don't. There's less. They're bigger, but there's less likelihood of them hitting the bottom compared to the old traditional ships. But yes, it's still you don't want to be going into the Barmouth on a rough day in any size of vessel. Never mind a ship that doesn't have. You're literally surfing a ship in sometimes.
Okay.
So yes, it's not. Once you get through the Barmouth, it's not too bad. Yes, it's a bendy river, and you've the small problem of a railway bridge in the way. But the Barmouth would be the biggest challenge.
I mean, have you any idea of what the volume of shipping would have been, in its heyday? I mean, numbers of ships per week or per day or per month or anything like that?
I think in the 50s, you're probably looking at 500 ships.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they were smaller, they needed more of them, and there was trade too. There was imports, exports. There was a lot of activity, and you had the coal, you had timber coming in, and pit props going out. You had general cargo. The days before your courier companies or whatever, you put it on a boat and it would go to Liverpool and then get distributed by the train networks. You had the tankers coming in with raw materials for Chemstrand or Monsanto. You also had tankers bringing materials in for the gasworks when it was operation. So you had a lot of different cargoes coming in, whereas you don't have any of that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, because the like of Aiken's, the late Derek Aiken would have probably built his business, the Aiken's timber business, up at that stage from the shipping.
Yes, all like Ellis's, Aiken's, Diamonds. They all imported timber at that stage. Whereas it's now it all comes on a very large ship, or even in containers to somewhere like Belfast or Derry, and that's it then gets sort of moved around rather than coming direct to Coleraine.
Okay. Thank you for that. Neal, any other questions or comments from anybody else?
Just want to check, because I don't know if everybody can see the messages on the side panel here, but just another particular hello to Charlotte, who's hi Charlotte, who is Robert's daughter, and she's saying, well done. You've probably read this, Neal, have you? Saying,
No, I haven't yet.
well done to my big brother for such an informative talk, an amazing project idea. Dad would be very proud.
No, thank you.
And then she very kindly goes on to thank the Coleraine Historical Society for having a talk in her and Neal's dad's memory, and that they're very grateful as a family, and best wishes for future talks. So thank you, Charlotte, for your lovely comments.
Thank you. I'm currently on my way home from work, and I'm filled in, and I'm in the dark here. the street lights, but I've pulled the car over to make sure I can got most of Neal's talk after work. So well done, Neal, and yeah, thanks again very much for this opportunity to just wish I could have seen it there. But it's yeah, I know Neal's worked very hard on that over quite a few months to get things together. So yes, thank you very much, and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yep. Thanks very much, Charlotte. Nice to see you there. Any other messages, Anne-Marie, or is that more or less? Sorry, I've lost you in sound there, Anne-Marie. Hello. Yeah,
there's some just on Facebook, but I've just run out of battery, so I can't read it. So, but I'll be able to sort of forward some other bits and pieces on as we go, and I think we're maybe getting a little tight on time, are we?
Okay. Well, look, just before we sort of say goodbye to everybody, obviously I'd like to thank you all for attending, and for Neal in particular for his very informative and interesting talk, and an emotive one as well, I have to say. Could I just remind all our members and anybody else who's interested that we are having the launch of the band disc this Saturday coming at the Sandal Centre at 10 o'clock. It'll be the first physical gathering we're having since COVID kicked in. So I hope as many of you as possible feel that you can come along on Saturday morning and buy the latest copy of the band disc. Could I also ask the members of the committee if they could stay on for a few minutes after this on Zoom, just to have a short chat about the band disc launch on Saturday. So finally, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you very much, Neal. I hope we'll be talking to you at some stage in the future about whatever projects maybe are coming along. Okay, so
fingers crossed.
Yep, indeed. Okay, everyone.
Thanks again for allowing me the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neal. Well done.
All the best.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye-bye.